Okay, I will call the regular assembly meeting of January 9th to order. Mr. Bryson, will you please lead us in our flag salute?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Smith, will you please do our land acknowledgement?
Of course, we acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on unceded Tlingit land and wish to honor the people of this land, the Akwán and Takuquan. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Kunishish.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Madam Clerk, will you please call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Assembly Member Walahira.
Here.
Ms. Wall,
Present.
Mr. Smith,
Here.
Ms. Hale,
Here.
Mr. Bryson,
Present.
and Madam Treem, Acting Mayor.
Here.
And for the record, we have Ms. Hughes-Scandies, Deputy Mayor Gladaszewski, and Mayor Weldon absent for tonight, and a quorum is present.
Okay. Special order of business. Madam Clerk, will you please tell us instructions for public participation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We have the public participation via Zoom has been advertised, and the cutoff for that was at 4 p.m. this evening. We do have a few members of the public who have signed up in advance to speak on that. We also, for the members that might be in the room, we have a sign-up sheet at the back of the room, and this is your opportunity to sign up if you wish to do so. We have public participation on non-agenda items, as well as those items listed under public hearing, and all the other items on the agenda other than ordinances for introduction. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Approval of minutes, Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt the minutes from July 11th regular Assembly meeting, the August 16th special Assembly meeting, and the August 25th special Assembly meeting, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Those minutes are adopted. Manager's request for agenda changes, Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one agenda change request, and that would be to move resolution 3011, that is the resolution on the Visitor Industry Task Force, off of the consent agenda and put it first on public hearing. So right before item 20, that's resolution 3011, move to public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Usually there's public requests for consent agenda changes other than item for introduction. Is that right?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So yes, that I believe that's the next item on the agenda.
I see public participation on non-agenda items next.
It's, I believe it's under H. H kind of one, or the first bullet.
Is that before or after public participation? Should we do public participation after that?
Madam Mayor, first you do participation on non-agenda items.
Oh, okay.
And then when we go to the consent agenda, any requests for consent agenda changes by the public are entertained at that time.
Okay.
So
Got
at
it.
this time, it's the public participation on non-agenda items, and I'll go back to the sign-up sheet and bring that forward to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Cole, if you would like to come up to the microphone and press the button so that it turns green. And state your name and area of town for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My name is Mandy Cole. I live in the valley, kind of near the glacier. It's pretty cold out there right now. I'm here today. I come before you for a million different reasons, but today is kind of a cool one. I'm here to tell you about a project that I've been working on with some partners in Juneau. I recognize I'm often complaining about housing when you see me, and so we are we're walking our talk, I suppose that you could say, because we have started a new idea, a new council called the Juneau Nonprofit Housing Development Council. And we are coming to you with the vision of helping to distinguish between the kinds of development that happen to promote housing in Juneau. You get lots of requests for assistance and for support for different kinds of housing projects. And our aim is to help provide the information and education to differentiate our asks and our requests from other potential housing requests. So our mission will be to advocate for, build, and sustain housing options that are accessible and affordable for those who experience poverty within our community. So we are specifically looking at the 30 and below AMI, area median income. And part of what we want to provide to you is both information, education about the different ways that developing housing for that sector of our community is challenging. And one of the reasons why we rely so heavily on municipal support in lots of different ways, not just financial, but other supports, is because the strategy for building housing for people that have very, very little money is different than building housing for the regular free market. And so we are hoping, as we get this going, to be a resource to this assembly and to the city and to the community at large, to try and make sure that we're building housing because we know we need it, but we're building it across the spectrum where it can be best used. I also, have some development friends. Some are here in this audio in the gallery today, and I think it's important to understand that we are aiming to do different things when we come before you with certain projects, and we want to be able to articulate that and distinguish those needs. We are at this moment aware Catholic Community Services, Gastineau Human Services, JAMI, Juneau Housing First Collaborative, DBA Glory Hall, Society of St. Vincent de Paul, Juneau, Clinton-Haida Regional Housing Authority, and the Juneau Community Foundation, who have formed this kind of loose coalition to educate, to prioritize projects, and hopefully to be a resource for everyone. Today's our big launch day for you.
Thank you, Ms. Cole. Any questions for Ms. Cole? Ms. Hale and then Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Cole. This sounds exciting and promising and challenging. I don't know if you have had an opportunity to talk with our chair of the Lands, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, who is Alicia Hughes, Assembly Member Hughes Candies. And also, have you had an opportunity to talk with Mr. Blydorn, who is our lands manager? I think what you're doing is really admirable, but as you know, as we've said many times, we're really trying to make sure things go through the appropriate channels that we've already set up. So if you've had that opportunity, that's great. And I encourage you to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just curious if we have more questions or ideas. Are you the person to reach out to, or is there another person?
Well, geez, I was hoping you would ask that question because at our last meeting, we were like, not. Everybody was nodded. So for right now, I think it will probably be myself or Amy Skilbred, who it was really helping us to pull this together. We've had about, I don't know, we met weekly for most of the fall and just pulled together some right now we're a coalition of ideals, and hopefully soon will be a coalition of actions. And we have no specific asks for you at this moment, other than to let you know that this is our aim and that we hope you can use us in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Cole.
Thank you.
Any other public participation on non-agenda items from folks in the room? Oh, Ms.
Madam-
Cathcart, do we have somebody?
You do have Mr. Pratt is on, Mr. Spratt, sorry, is on Zoom.
Okay, can you bring Mr. Spratt over? Okay. Mr. Spratt, you will have 3 minutes. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record.
Hello, my name is Aaron Spratt. I live in the Valley. I'm calling in regards to, pardon me, a January 7th KNY story talking about retention efforts within City and Borough of Juneau jobs. I just had a couple questions that I would ask that the Assembly is looking at and asking of the mayor and the city manager. What is the city manager's role and responsibility in retention? He is the featured interviewee within the article. What kind of work environment does the city manager establish within city offices? I would want to know if the city assembly is asking that of Mr. Watt. Also, are they asking the city manager, why are senior people leaving? Mr. Watt has, to what I think I recognize, over 30 years with the city. Why are his peers leaving in droves, according to the article? They cite the pandemic as being challenges to city workers and city retention. What is the city's role and the city manager's role in that? Also, the city's continued promotion of woke ideology and the retention and the recruitment of competent professionals. Is that being evaluated by the city assembly and asked of during the hiring process? And then are we examining the projects that we're funding, and does that have an effect on how we can recruit the professionals that we need? Projects like gondolas, projects that the city's getting involved in with potentially new docks. Does that have an impact on city workers that might come to Juneau and saying, we don't want to be a part of this? So I would just ask the assembly, are you asking these questions of the city manager and the mayor in regards to these very public discussions according to KINY? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spratt. Any questions from Mr. Spratt from the assembly? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Okay. That brings us to the consent agenda and public request for consent agenda changes other than items for introduction. Assembly requests for consent agenda changes. Seeing none, assembly action, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the consent agenda as amended, with the amendment being that resolution 3011 will be pulled from the consent agenda and will be heard at the beginning of public hearing. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Hale. Okay. I need to check my instructions. Do we do this? Public hearing? Okay, so public hearing.
Madam Mayor, you might call for any objections to the motion before we
Okay,
move on.
any objections to Ms. Hale's motion? Okay, seeing none, that motion passes.
Thank you.
And that brings us to public hearing and resolution 3011, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is resolution 3011, a resolution adopting cruise ship tourism policy objectives from the Visitor Industry Task Force final report.
Mr. Manager.
The Visitor Industry Task Force met in 2019 and 2020. The final report was delivered in March of 2020. The Assembly accepted but never formally adopted the VITF recommendations or the overarching policy objectives because the immediate challenges of COVID-19 required the Assembly's full attention. Staff's approach to date has been to deal with VITF recommended issues as they arrive, even without adopting the specific recommendations from the VITF final report. The management of cruise ship tourism in the community would benefit from the Assembly adopting the 5 overarching policy objectives in this resolution. Assembly Committee of the Whole discussed this topic on November 28, 2022. I recommend you adopt this resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Public testimony? Okay. Our first person who has signed up for this is Ms. Metcalf on Zoom. Can you bring Ms. Metcalf over? Okay.
Madam Mayor, members of
Yes,
the Assembly, can you hear me?
yes. Ms.
Okay.
Metcalf, if you will state your name and area of town you live in, and you will have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the Assembly. My name is Kim Metcalf and I live at 730 Gold Street. I'm here to testify on Resolution 3011, adopting the Visitor Industry Task Force recommendations. I am extremely disappointed that the resolution showed up on a consent agenda item with no opportunity for public testimony. The only reason we're allowed to testify on this is because Ms. Hart asked for it to be pulled from the consent agenda. I came away from the recent Assembly retreat during which you discussed cruise ship tourism, feeling like the Assembly was finally recognizing the problems this industry brings with it. A memorandum from Tourism Manager Alexandra Pierce dated November 23rd, 2022 was included in your packet. It outlined a long-term strategy for tourism management, provided an update on VITF recommendations, and provided context on tourism management priorities. In the memo, Ms. Pierce stated that the VITF policy objectives were never formally adopted and, quote, while staff is working on these issues, it's important that the Assembly have a public process and formally adopt a resolution articulating these objectives, unquote. During the retreat, Assembly Member Hale stated that the Assembly should, quote, absolutely do a resolution, and she further stated that a public process is important. Assembly Member Hughes Scandis stated, quote, a resolution is a good vehicle for public process. She further stated that the 5-ship limit put forward in the McKinley Research Survey did not include options for fewer than 5 ships. I came away from the retreat thinking there would be a healthy public process and there would be public hearings. We're looking at 1.6 million cruise ship tourists this year. A new dock is proposed at Egan and Whittier. The McKinley survey asked whether respondents were supportive or opposed to the CBJ limiting the number of large cruise ships per day in Juneau's Harbor to 5, and 3/4 of the respondents, 76%, were supportive of limits. 18% were opposed. I am asking that the Assembly please schedule public hearings on cruise ship tourism and this report by the Visitor Industry Task Force. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Metcalf. Any Assembly questions for Ms. Metcalf? Okay, I see none. Next on our list is Ms. Hart.
Thank you.
Can you press the button on the microphone? There we go. And you've got
Green.
3
Okay.
minutes.
Thank you. My name is Carla Hart. I live on the back loop. I am asking you to consider, I would love you to slow down, but I'm willing for you to accept this amendment tonight with some comments that I sent to you and hopefully you received by email earlier today. Measuring cruise volume by cruise ship numbers is like saying, could I get a load of fertilizer and not knowing if somebody's going to show up in your yard with a pickup truck load or a semi truck load. In Dunedin, New Zealand, they just was an article that they have the first time 3 cruise ships in their community. It's a record for one day. there were 1,700 passengers off the 3 cruise ships. They showed a picture in the article of a Holland America cruise ship in Dunedin. Holland America ship is more than 2,000 passengers. You're measuring impacts and the source of impacts in a way that the volume of the container is vastly different from one container to the next, and the containers like Costco are getting bigger. I disagree with the limit of 5 cruise ships. However, I appreciate that in doing this in ordinance or resolution, you're acknowledging that you should and that you can limit cruise ship passengers. So if you pass this resolution tonight, it shows that we, the community, have the opportunity to work with you to get limits that are lower. And the 2021 survey, the average number of cruise ships, and they used an average instead of a median, but it came out to 4.2 cruise ships. Why the city chose to ask 5 cruise ships as the limit instead of 4, which the 2021 survey suggested, I don't know, but I would strongly suggest that you amend the resolution tonight to say 4 cruise ships, which is closer to the 4.2 that the community asked or suggested that was their preference, but they were not given a chance to respond to. I also am really concerned that it says the limit of cruise ships in the Juneau port, implying that if West Juneau or other places come into play, that we could add more cruise docks elsewhere. You haven't resolved the problems here, so don't leave the door open for someone to propose cruise ship docks elsewhere in Juneau, please. Delete in the port and just set your limit for Juneau. Getting shore power for all the docks, which you mentioned, is incredibly vital. Through some work being done with a global organization, started really looking at the impacts of cruise ships on human health, and it's horrifying. And the grant proposal that CBJ has put in, trying to get money to electrify the city docks, shows millions of dollars worth of impacts that will resolve. And those impacts are measured in dollars, but for all of us, they're measured in asthma and heart attacks and other things. So please, if you pass this, understand that you haven't solved the problem.
Thank you, Ms. Hart. Any questions for Ms. Hart? Okay, thank you. Anybody else who would like to testify on this resolution? Okay, I will bring it back to the assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Ms.
may
Hare.
I request a brief at ease?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt Resolution 3011, resolution adopting cruise ship tourism policy objectives from the Visitor Industry Task Force final report, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Object.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you. I object to that motion, and I ask instead that we postpone this motion to the next assembly meeting so that there is more opportunity for public comment. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection to Ms. Hale's motion? Okay, is that good for you guys? Okay, seeing none, that motion is adopted. That will come back to us at the next meeting. That brings us to item 20, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-62. An ordinance amending the official zoning map of the city and borough to change the zoning of 10.97 acres of the Peterson Hill property located near Carl Reiches Boulevard and Hamilton Street from D10 SF to D10.
Mr. Manager.
On July 6, 2022, Moline Investment Management submitted an application to the CBJ Lands and Resources Department to purchase approximately 11 acres of CBJ property at Peterson Hill with the intention of pursuing a rezone to achieve increased density for a housing project. August 8, 2022, Lands, Housing and Economic Development Committee reviewed and provided a motion of support to negotiate the disposal of CBJ property. On July 25th, 2022, applicants submitted an to the Community Development Department for a rezone, and on September 13, 2022, at its regular meeting, Planning Commission reviewed and recommended the Assembly adopt the rezone. Both zoning districts allow for up to 10 dwelling units per acre. However, D10 SF provides only for the development of single-family dwellings, while D10 allows multifamily structures. This rezone conforms with the 2013 Comprehensive Plan, 2016 Housing Action Plan, and 2016 Economic Development Plan. If the rezone is approved, the applicant will need to complete a purchase and sales agreement for the property. Prior to development, the applicant will need to acquire all necessary permits and Planning Commission approval if necessary. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. We have one person signed up to testify on this ordinance, Mr. Sidney. Am I getting that right? Okay. If you could come up to the microphone and press the button so that it turns green. Introduce yourself and say the area of town you live in, and you will have 3 minutes once you get started.
Okay, my button's green. My name is James Sidney. I've been a Juneau resident for 53 years. I don't know. But 54, I guess now. Anyway, I live at Swampy Acres, which is adjacent to this piece of property and the subdivision. My reason what I'm looking for is for 4 assembly members to vote in favor with me that this rezone not be approved, as this project that doing this affordable housing project at Peterson Hill subdivision was put through here 5-6 years ago as a single family in a likeness of Casey Shattuck subdivision, which is right next to the federal building here in town. And it was designed around that and went through many public hearings, a lot of meetings, and we finally approved it in the neighborhood that that's what was wanted for this affordable housing project. And to have it go up now that somebody just comes off the street and wants to go buy a block of housing so they can put a 60-unit apartment building up there and put it right behind my house when they promised, or not promised, but that's what we had negotiated and what we went through with all the public process earlier is to change it into single family units, which is what everybody was looking for to do in this 300 lot subdivisions, how it was presented in 3 phases. And this is phase 3, which is supposed to be done last. First one was done right there at the beginning. It got all the superstructure in and got 16 lots in there. I think there's 13 families there now that bought single family units. And now they proposed this 10-acre piece of property that runs on the back side of it and then hooking down with a street into Hamilton and then accessing it off of Rifus Boulevard or Rifus Street with no provisions for, 60 units. I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of sense on what was proposed to us and approved by the neighborhood. And I would have done a lot more homework on it, but I've been kind of sick this past winter, and so my asthma has been pretty rough. Shouldn't burn so much firewood, I guess. But anyway, that's what I'm looking for, is find 4 assembly members that will push this down.
Thank you, Mr. Sidney. Any questions from the assembly for Mr. Sidney? Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Sidney, thank you for being here. Just wondering, maybe for you to just lay out what your concerns are going to be if there is housing of higher density up there, and if you're aware of any ways that that might be remedied during the planning commission process.
Well, when we were going through the process of having single families, and it was all laid out to be looking just like 10th Street, 11th Street, 12th Street, nice houses, nice little alleyways, and everybody have their individual space. And then coming up with a 60-unit apartment building, you're going to end up with, Coho Park, Schnook sitting right back there behind there. And that's not what we envisioned. That's not what anybody envisioned, is to come up with the thing. And then the neighborhood wasn't set up for that, to come up with, but it does have the bus transportation, and it has the sewer, which I helped push and get through in our neighborhood. We're one of the last areas in the valley to get sewer through there. And that's where we've been D10, or we were D3, transitioning to D5, and then they changed it to D10 here about 10 years ago. And I've had my farm up there for, 50 years now. And they never come and ask me if they wanted to buy my 10 acres. They can just build their units right there because it's already zoned D10, it's right on the highway. But I just think that's pulling the wool over everybody's eyes. They push it through, and they got this because it was a rural reserve. It was mental health land, and then the city selected it, and it was going to build a nice subdivision. It was going to look like Shattuck and Crummett, the Shattuck subdivision there in town. And that's what we, ended up approving.
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yeah, Mr. Stanley, or Sidney, excuse me, my thought on it was just that knowing that the planning commission does evaluate impacts with and proposes conditions like buffers and that type of thing that.
Yeah.
I know that may not solve all your.
Yeah, well, the way they have it set up is that they got 2 outlets coming out of it. One's going to go down Hamilton Boulevard, through that neighborhood of 12 houses. And then the other outlet's going to go down through the existing neighborhood that's got 16 lots. I think there's 12 families up there, or close to 12 families there now. And but the next phase was supposed to going towards the river, was what was supposed to be built next. And it's just a pulling the wool over your eyes. It's not what we expected, not what we were planning on.
Thank you, Mr. Sidney. Anybody else?
Did I sway anybody?
You'll find out. Anybody else in the room who wishes to testify on this ordinance? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the assembly. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the assembly approve ordinance 2022-62, an ordinance amending the official zoning map of the city and borough to change the zoning of 10.97 acres of the Peterson Hill property located near Carl Ratius Boulevard and Hamilton Street from D10 SF to D10, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just for a comment. When this had initially been proposed, I had kind of heard in the lands committee, I believe I am sympathetic to that it is changing and that there was a zoning level set for D10 single family, and that we are now changing that. I can completely understand that those people that bought those lots along Carl Ratius Boulevard, that they expected those to be single family homes around there. And I'm compassionate towards that. I think the need for housing, unfortunately, in my opinion, is overwhelming, and that I think this is a spot for that, and that I just hope that as the projects move forward, that they keep the needs of the neighbors in mind, security, traffic, buffers, those type of things. reduce the impacts on the neighbors, because I am compassionate to those issues and concerns. Thank you, but I remove my objection.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Okay, seeing no objection, that motion passes. That brings us to item 21, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-63, an ordinance authorizing the manager to enter into a revenue sharing agreement with Gold Belt Incorporated to fund installation of the gondola and associated infrastructure at the Eagle Crest ski area.
Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would allow the CBJ to accept $10 million from Gold Belt Incorporated for the installation of the gondola and associated facilities. In exchange for the capital contribution, CBJ would share summer revenues from the gondola project. Notably, the city and borough of Juneau is not pledging taxes, revenue from taxes, or the full faith and credit of the municipality. Gold Belt Inc. is uniquely situated to execute a revenue sharing agreement with CBJ because Gold Belt Inc. owns Gold Belt Tram Alaska, which eliminates competition concerns, encourages diversification of impacts and sustainable use of both aerial conveyances. And Gold Belt Inc. has a natural financial interest to see both aerial conveyances prosper while benefiting the community. This topic has been discussed at numerous meetings of the Assembly Finance Committee, Assembly Committee of the Whole since spring of 2022. Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed this request at December 13 meeting and forwarded to the full assembly for public hearing. The Eagle Crest Board took this up last week and sent you by email a copy of their motion and their approval of the ordinance from last week's meeting. And I see several Eagle Crest Board members in the audience and thank them for their assistance on this. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Mr. Denton and Mr. Satry, I'm assuming this is the Eagle Crest ordinance you want to talk about, not the coffee shop franchise? Okay. Mr. Denton, you signed up first, so you can come up first. Oh, sorry. You will have 3 minutes after you press the button to turn it green on the microphone. Okay.
Hi, my name is Bruce Denton. I live on the back loop. I'm here to speak in favor of this ordinance. As a builder for the last nearly 50 years in Juneau, I just wanted to underscore the urgency of moving forward with this thing from this perspective of the project that needs to be accomplished up on the mountain. Juneau has a relatively short building season at sea level. And when you get up to Eagle Crest, it gets worse. And when you get to the ridge, it gets much worse. I've done a couple of projects up at Eagle Crest as a contractor and have experienced some of those issues. And particularly in light of the supply chain impediments that the construction industry is seeing right now, it's really imperative that this project takes advantage of this time of the year to really complete the design and be able to hit the ground running in the spring. And even a delay of a few weeks now means that a contractor is going to get shut down up on that mountain 2 weeks sooner than they otherwise would. And a 2-week delay now could be a year. So I guess my concern is when I see 3 assembly members here that are effectively no votes, that it'd be really easy to defer this thing on. And I urge you to not do that and approve the ordinance tonight. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Denton? Okay. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Satry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Mike Satry. I live in the Valley, and I'm here tonight in my capacity as the board chair of the Eagle Crest Board of Directors, and really want to thank many of our board for showing up tonight. Dave Hannah Shively, Stephanie Hogue in the back, and I think John Dale is online, and we might have a few others online as well. Also want to start off by thanking the assembly members for taking the bold step last spring to help ensure the future of Eagle Crest as we move forward. The gondola is the key to our future and in being self-sufficient as we move into the years ahead of us. And I also want to thank Gold Belt for stepping up once the assembly made that investment decision to say that they wanted to be part of this as a public-private partnership, put the capital up in return for a up to 25-year partnership with the city. So I think there's some great things that have happened. This past spring, we authorized our general manager, Dave Scanlon, to negotiate with Gold Belt on this contract once that interest was made known. And the board gave him directions that we wanted to see some sort of revenue sharing agreement. We wanted the city to maintain control of its assets and its pricing up at Eagle Crest, and we did not want to cede any revenues from our winter operations, the idea that the summer operations would be separate. We did not get to be part of those negotiations. Dave was only able to give us some very high-level updates over the course of the year, given the confidentiality of the process. And also thanks to the city legal team and the Gold Belt legal team for really working through some thorny issues on public-private partnerships. So we got the contract about the same time the assembly did, and we were pleased to see that from a high level, it met the directives that we had given Mr. Scanlon. And when we dove into the contract, I think we were all very happy to see what it contained within. And ultimately, we passed the motion to recommend approval of the contract by this assembly unanimously last week. There's a few little things I want to highlight here and then be open up for questions. I think we're very happy with the tiered system of revenue that is proposed in the contract. It allows us to get our summer operations moving forward. And if we are successful, then Gold Belt is able to recoup its investment a lot sooner. Sometimes those numbers in those tiers can look scary when you talk about 55,000 summer visitors, but the reality is, given the summer season that's defined in the contract, that's an average of 300 people per day or 6 to 7 tour buses. So it's actually not that large, especially when compared with a nice sunny powder day at Eagle Crest, when we probably have over 11 to 1,200 people utilizing that facility. Even at the higher levels of 75,000 people, that's 400 people per day average, 8 to 9 tour buses. It's important in here that this is the city retains its control of its assets and its pricing. Gold Belt does not control the pricing as the contract stipulates, and this is not an exclusive arrangement. This really only covers the gondola, the building at the top, and any alpine coaster that would be developed as part of this. All of our other facilities, anything else we might do in summer operations is for us, unless we do some sort of contract amendment with Gold Belt. There's great protections in here for both the city and Gold Belt should one party fail to live up to its expectations. And I think it's really neat to see that Gold Belt is mandated to be an active partner in promoting the summer activities at Eagle Crest. So that's my time. I certainly, on behalf of the board, urge approval of the ordinance, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Satry. Any questions from the assembly for Mr. Satry? Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Satry, thank you. And thank you to the Eagle Crest Board for all of your work on this. How many meetings do you think have been dedicated to operations of the gondola, getting the gondola set up, or what we're going to do once we have it, how we're going to work with Gold Belt as a public-private partnership? Could you just maybe elaborate on what the board did to get us to this point, please? Thank you.
I would say that I think if you would go back and look at our agendas over the past few years, the updates on the gondola and before that, work on summer operations and what that might look like has been a part of almost every, if not every single agenda that we have had. When I was first appointed to the Eagle Crest Board, so this is my second term, so I think 5 years ago, our very first retreat that fall was dedicated towards summer activities, Eagle Crest, and the possibility of a gondola, actually in a much different alignment at that time. So we've gone through various iterations of planning. We of course had the task force with the assembly that was working hard on this prior to COVID, and we had a little bit of discussion afterwards. But this has been a constant item of discussion at the board level. And then, of course, Mr. Scanlon, in his role as general manager, has been out in the public over time, explaining what we're doing and making sure that we're communicating our ideas with the public. I guess one thing to add to that is we've heard from the get-go that there wants to be some preservations of the public space, the city's residents' public space, Eagle Crest, and some separation of activities. And we've certainly, heard that, and we have visions of the west side being the commercial area and the east side being the Juneau public area where they're already utilizing the access road that we have. And, I think it's another important item, in the contract that the city may put, caps on the visitations to the area through this project, and also, comply with the plans that we would have in terms of managing the area.
Thank you, Mr. Satry. Okay, I see no other questions. Thank you to the board members who are here tonight. We will bring this back to the assembly. I think I'm on Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2022-63, an ordinance authorizing the manager to enter into a revenue sharing agreement with Gold Belt Inc. to fund installation of the gondola and associated infrastructure at the Eagle Crest ski area. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just objecting for a comment and a question, and then I'll remove my objection. Just wanted to reemphasize that although I was a no vote on spending public funds to purchase the gondola, I'm very happy to have Gold Belt's money invested in this project, and thank them for their partnership on this. My question is for the manager. Maybe you could walk us through what are the next steps if this passes tonight between here and ground being broken, and how is the assembly involved in those steps?
Mr. Manager, sorry, that's me.
Thank you, Mayor. So with this appropriation, I think we will see all sorts of activity. The first thing we'll see is a starting of a road sometime this spring, summer. That's the one piece that we can make progress on this summer. You will also get an ordinance proposing an alternative procurement. Generally, building a gondola on a mountain is not well suited for our low bid process. You will also see in the CIP, and I've talked to the board chair and the Eagle Crest manager, a request that Eagle Crest be provided funding for some master planning. So I think there's been a little bit of question or frustration from the public about what the big picture is. So they'll be moving forward on the construction procurement front, but there will also be this funding request for master planning, as Chair Satry sort of pointed out, that some people are asking the question of, is there going to be a separation of uses? And I think that master planning process will give the public a formal opportunity to engage on that topic in a formal way to participate in those decisions. I hope that answers your questions.
Mr. Bryson? Okay. I will say, just before we get to any more objections, I also support this, especially this partnership with Gold Belt, which I think is breaking new ground for CBJ. I think at least one person in this room is surprised to hear me say that, but I do want to say that I have asked a lot of hard questions of the board and of Mr. Scanlon, and it's not because I'm mean, it's because the assembly has a duty to do its due diligence, especially on a deal of this size. And I think that having the answers to those questions before we get there is just going to ensure the success of this project. So I know there's a lot of work still to be done. So I'm happy that the board is ready to engage in that, and that Mr. Scanlon is ready to engage in that. And I look forward to seeing the end result. With that, is there any more objection? Seeing none, that motion has passed. Okay. That brings us to item 22. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-64, an ordinance reorganizing and consolidating the Aquatics Board, the Treadwell Arena Advisory Board, the Jensen Olson Arboretum Advisory Board, and the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee.
Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would dissolve the Treadwell Arena Advisory Board, the Aquatics Board, the Jensen Olson Arboretum Advisory Board, and transfer those board duties to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. Because recruitment and retention for so many community volunteers is so difficult, vacancies and frequently canceled meetings due to lack of quorum. Consolidation into the PRAC will result in more effective and impactful meetings, which will improve morale of board members and community engagement. If a discrete community concern arises, the PRAC or the Assembly would be able to create a temporary task force to address a future concern. Assembly Committee of the Whole discussed this topic on November 7, 2022. Systemic Racism Review Committee reviewed this ordinance on December 13, 2022. On January 3, 2023, the PRAC reviewed this ordinance and unanimously recommended the Assembly adopt it with a proposed amendment, which is presented by Assembly Member Smith. On January 9, Assembly Human Resources Committee was scheduled to consider this item in light of the SRRC discussion. I recommend the Assembly adopt this ordinance with Assembly Member Smith's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. There's nobody who has signed up to testify on this. Anybody in the room who would like to testify on this? Okay, as we bring it back, I'm wondering, Mr. Smith, if you would like to report on what happened in your committee tonight.
Sure, Madam Mayor. So interestingly enough, the Human Resources Committee met tonight with two members, myself and Ms. Wall were there, which was enough to establish quorum, but not enough to actually take official action. So we discussed some of the components of the ordinance. We discussed my amendment, some other questions, but beyond that, there is no official recommendation from the committee because we could not make one.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Bryson, did you have a motion?
Absolutely, Madam Mayor. I move that the Assembly adopt ordinance 2022.
One. The brief patties. Did you want to? Man, this is hard.
Madam Mayor, would you like me to do the motion and then somebody can amend?
Sure. Why not?
Madam Mayor, I move that the Assembly adopt ordinance 2022-64, ordinance reorganizing, consolidating the Aquatics Board, Treadwell Arena, Jensen Olson Arboretum, and the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. And I ask for unanimous consent, but we will.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd amend Mr. Bryson's motion to instead send this back to the committee of the whole. And if I could speak to my motion. I think this is a big deal, what we're doing, and I really appreciate staff working on this because they've got, they're dealing with some serious issues of committees that have been not very effective because they've had trouble meeting quorum or having trouble finding members. And so I appreciate the work that's been done, but I think this could benefit from more discussion from the full Assembly, and because we were not able to discuss it as a full Human Resource Committee. I also think that the full Assembly did not get the SSRC memo that we were able to discuss at the HRC. And I just feel like our members would benefit from reading that before we take action on this.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Any objections to Ms. Wall's amendment? Okay, seeing that passes. Is that an amendment or a motion? We have to go back to the original one?
I think I heard a motion on that one.
Okay, so we're good.
Yes,
Okay.
all good.
Thank you. Ready to keep moving, or do we need a break? Okay. That brings us to item 23, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-65, an ordinance authorizing the Eagle Crest Ski Area to enter into a franchise agreement with Mountain Lift LLC for coffee and baked goods services.
Mr. Watt.
This ordinance would authorize the Eagle Crest Ski Area to enter into a franchise agreement for a coffee shop in the Fish Creek Lodge. Normally, CBJ would use the lease process for this type of arrangement, but Federal Land and Water Conservation Fund prohibits CBJ from issuing leases at Eagle Crest. However, CBJ can grant a franchise for a coffee shop concessionaire by ordinance. After soliciting statements of interest, the current vendor, Mountain Lift LLC, was the only respondent. This ordinance would allow Mountain Lift LLC to operate the coffee shop for 5 winter seasons. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Any member of the public wish to speak on this ordinance? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the Assembly. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2022-65, an ordinance authorizing the Eagle Crest Ski Area to enter into a franchise agreement with Mountain Lift LLC for coffee and baked goods service, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Mr. Bryson.
Object for purpose of a question. Mr. Manager, how many years has Mountain Lift LLC operated coffee operations at Eagle Crest?
Mayor, the Eagle Crest manager is holding up, I believe, 7 fingers, more plus or minus.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'll remove my objection.
Thank you, Ms. Bryson. Okay, seeing no objection, that motion passes. And we will move on to item 24, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06, version B, large letter Y, an ordinance transferring $60,000 from Eagle Crest Fleet and Equipment Reserve account to the Eagle Crest Gondola Capital Improvement Project.
Mr. Manager.
Transportation of Eagle Crest Gondola exceeded cost estimates by $261,608 as a result of steep fuel surcharges and detention fees on global shipping containers transported to Juneau. This expense will be covered by the following sources: Eagle Crest Deferred Maintenance CIP, $161,608, Eagle Crest Fleet Equipment Reserve Account, $60,000. Eagle Crest Gondola CIP, $40,000. This ordinance provides for the $60,000 transfer from Eagle Crest Fleet and Equipment Reserve account, and Gold Belt loan proceeds may reimburse this account once the loan agreement is effectuated. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Any member of the public wish to speak on this ordinance? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the Assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly adopt ordinance 2022-06 BY, an ordinance transferring as written.
And ask for
And ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Any objection to that ordinance? Seeing none, that one is adopted as well. That brings us to item 25, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06, version B, large letter Z as in Z, an ordinance appropriating $250,000 to the manager for junk vehicle cleanup and remediation at River Road, funding provided by general funds.
Mr. Manager.
To date, 103 vehicles have been removed from the River Road property, costing a total of $152,500. CBJ has been reimbursed for $105,000 of that amount. Remaining balance will be reimbursed pursuant to a court order, which allows CBJ to foreclose on the property beginning with the vehicles. As of October 27, 2022, there are still approximately 228 vehicles located at the River Road property. CBJ will request a court order to seize and auction any vehicles of value to attempt to recoup some of the remaining balance owed. Due to the lengthy court process, there is a need for additional funds now to complete remediation work. Similar to the last round of cleanup, CBJ will seek reimbursement of these expenses in subsequent legal proceedings, which may result in property foreclosure. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Any member of the public who wishes to speak on this ordinance? Seeing none, I will bring it back to the assembly. Walaki Doc.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2022-06B, capital letter Z as in Z, and ask unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that ordinance passes. That brings us to item 26, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06, version B, large letter A, an ordinance appropriating $3,164,401 to the manager for the power upgrades for electric buses capital improvement project. Grant funding provided by the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities.
Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate $3,164,401 to the power upgrades for electric buses CIP. Grant funding is comprised of Federal Transit Administration funds passed through the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. Local match requirement of $558,425 is being met by previously appropriated funds in the power upgrades CIP. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Any member of the public wish to speak on this ordinance? Seeing none, Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly approve ordinance 2022-06 BAA, an ordinance appropriating $3.164,401 million to the manager for the power upgrades to the electric buses capital improvement project. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. That brings us to item 27, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06, version B, large letters AB. An ordinance appropriating $1,039,438 to the manager for the school roof replacement capital improvement project. Grant funding provided by the Alaska Department of Education and Early Development.
Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate $1,039,438 to the school roof replacement CIP for the Gastineau School Roof Replacement Project. Grant funding provided by Alaska Department of Education and Early Development replaces previously appropriated general funds, which will be reallocated to the Juneau School District Deferred Maintenance Capital Improvement Project. Local match requirement of $559,697 is being met by previously appropriated bond proceeds in the school roof replacement CIP. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Any member of the public wish to speak on this ordinance? Seeing none, Mr. Smith. Oh, yes.
Mr. Spratt has raised his virtual hand to speak on public participation.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Spratt, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Aaron Spratt. I live in the Valley. I'm just a little confused with $1 million going to the roof project. Is the consideration being given to the overspending of the school board that has garnered public attention on the order of millions of dollars? What checks and balances are being used to ensure that this money goes to the approved project in light of their abuse of the budget? I didn't see anything mentioned about that. And is this something that they have not budgeted for that they are requiring additional funding. I'm just a little confused on why you're appropriating $1 million when it seems like this should be something the school board is already planning for. That's only questions I have. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Spratt? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the assembly. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2022-06BAB and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection to that ordinance?
I'd like to object for purposes of a statement. It's my understanding, and I think the manager can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that CBJ owns all of the school buildings and we are responsible for their repair. Is that correct, Mr. Manager?
Mayor, that's correct. And the funding for school facility repairs is distinct from the operations of the school district and the provision of education.
Thank you, and I remove my objection.
Mr. Bryson.
I wanted to ask a follow-up on that. I think this might help the previous testifier or maybe some other public. Mr. Manager, what would happen to these state funds if the city refused to take, if the city denied this? What would happen to this state funding?
Mayor, the state would keep the $1 million and we would not receive it for the benefit of our school facilities.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Manager. I've removed my objection, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Seeing no objection, that motion passes. That brings us to item 28, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-06, version B, large letters AC. An ordinance appropriating $119,986 to the manager for the Valley Transit Center Capital Improvement Project. Grant funding provided by the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities.
Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate $119,986 to the Valley Transit Center CIP. Grant funding is comprised of Federal Transit Administration funds passed through the Alaska Department of Transportation and Public Facilities. Local match requirement of $29,997 is being met by a previously appropriated funds in the Valley Transit Center project. The original grant award erroneously excluded administrative overhead as an eligible expense. This grant amendment corrects this error by allocating additional funds for this purpose. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Any member of the public wish to speak on this ordinance? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the assembly. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2022-06B AC, an ordinance appropriating $119,986 for the Valley Transit Center Capital Improvement Project, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that motion is adopted. Are we good to keep going, or does anybody need a break? Yeah, okay. We'll take a quick 5-minute break. Okay, we're back. And we are on to item 29, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Gold Belt and CP Marine application for a land trade.
Mr. Manager.
Gold Belt Incorporated and CP Marine Incorporated submitted an application proposing a land trade near the Seadrome building to develop a new visitor-oriented building in support of the Juneau tourism market. August 25th, 2022, Docks and Harbors Board reviewed the proposal and passed a motion of support. December 19, 2022, Assembly Lands Housing and Economic Development Committee recommended the Assembly authorize negotiations for the land trade pursuant to CBJ Code 5309260. I request the Assembly authorize negotiations with Gold Belt and CP Marine for a land trade.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Do we do public participation on this or straight to, okay. Any member of the public wish to speak on this item? Seeing none. Assembly action? Anybody? Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the Assembly authorize the manager to negotiate with Gold Belt and CP Marine for a land trade and ask for unanimous consent.
I object for purposes of a question. I note that the map on page 100 is the map that shows the land. And it doesn't show any detailed about what's being proposed for transfer. And I guess my question to you, Mr. Manager, is that to all be worked out as this land trade occurs?
Mr. Manager.
Mayor, nominally, yes. So the packet has a black and white map, which is actually not terribly helpful. The color coded online version clarifies ownership between the two parties. And I think the clerk has color copies and she's walking in the back. The general idea is a land trade where money doesn't exchange hands. So the line between what ends up being CBJ and what ends up being Gold Belt and CP Marine is floating until we get appraisals and negotiations.
Any follow-up, Ms. Hale?
Yes, this is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Manager, this is the second time that a exchange right on the water has happened. And the last time that we made the exchange, I think details got missed in the trade and it prevented that project from coming to fruition. Can we make sure that we ask a couple extra deeper dive questions so that way I'd hate to do this trade and then not have a project happen again. Do you kind of get the sense of my gist here?
Mr. Manager.
Mayor, we will work closely to ensure that all parties understand the development opportunities and the development process as we move forward, because the goal here certainly is to rationalize the property lines so that Gold Belt and CP Marine can make an investment in property that they own.
There you go. I'm removing my objection, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor, I have one more.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you. On our consent agenda tonight was ordinance 2022-06 BAE, appropriating $300,000 to the manager for downtown subport planning. And we talked about this at our retreat and at other places. And I guess my question is, given that we want to do we possibly will go into a more robust planning effort, maybe the question to the manager, is this sort of preempting that, or is this just routine business that we really want to take care of?
Mr. Watt.
Mayor, I would say this is routine business. So in this case, neither party is particularly focused on the marine facility side. This is about a land trade side, though no doubt both parties are thinking about marine facilities. And this is a different area of the waterfront that serves and could be used by much smaller vessels. And I think the issues are not super complicated.
Thank you. I remove my objection.
Seeing no objection, that motion passes. I got lost. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. That brings us to item 30, Madam Clerk.
I guess it's my turn, Madam Mayor. Notice of Appeal 2022 AA07 Bay House Properties LLC versus Planning Commission. On November 22nd, 2022, the Planning Commission denied an application from Bay House Properties LLC for a conditional use permit for the development of condominiums with up to 21 dwelling units zoned waterfront commercial at 11485 Ock Bay Harbor Road. Mitch Falk, the representative for Bay House LLC, filed a timely appeal with the municipal clerk's office. In accordance with the appellate code, the assembly must decide whether to accept or reject the appeal. If you determine, after liberally construing the notice of appeal in order to preserve the rights of the appellant, that there's been a failure to comply with the appellate rules, or if the notice of appeal does not state grounds upon which any of the relief requested may be granted, you may reject the appeal. If the appeal is accepted, you must decide whether the assembly will hear it yourself or if you will assign it to a hearing officer. If you decided to hear it yourselves, a presiding officer should be appointed. And finally, in hearing the appeal, the assembly would sit in its quasi-judicial capacity and must avoid discussing the case outside of the hearing process. I recommend you accept the appeal and appoint a presiding officer.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Any member of the public wish to speak on this ordinance? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the assembly accept the appeal, and I would make the recommendation of appointing Christine Wall as the presiding officer, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection to that motion? It's your last chance. Seeing none, that motion has passed. That brings us to staff reports. Mr. Manager.
Mayor, we'll bring up Port Director Yucatel to give us a staff report on the MV Tagish, the wooden vessel that is currently sunk at the dock, at the National Guard dock.
Okay, Mr. Yucatel.
Thank you, Mayor Trim. So on December 29th, the harbor master received a call from Delta Western that a vessel was in distress, sinking. Harbor master showed up, notified the responsible party, Mr. Don Etheridge, made the proper notifications to the U.S. Coast DC, as well as the National Response Command in DC. Coast Guard came, federalized the incident in accordance with OPA 90, which is the Oil Pollution Act of 1990. They're concerned about violations of the Clean Water Act. They directed the responsible party to deploy BOOM, which is a device to help contain pollution. DEC had BOOM available. They provided it. Docks and Harbors provided some assistance with our small boat to deploy BOOM. The Coast Guard, working with the responsible party, has been monitoring the situation. The responsible party's been there, to my knowledge, nearly every day, if not every day, putting down absorbent pads. Over the weekend, the responsible party put out an additional BOOM, absorbent BOOM, which is designed to collect more of the dispersed oil. That seems to be more effective. So that was the wider DC BOOM that was initially deployed, was a larger area. The absorbent BOOM it more closely encircles the vessel. The vessel is 107 foot wooden hulled 1940s era tug. Is believed to have about 100 gallons of petroleum products on board. The Coast Guard, as of Friday, gave the responsible party until today to provide their plan to salvage the vessel. I met with the Coast Guard this morning. I showed up on their in their office. I asked to be notified of what those discussions were. I did not receive a phone call from the Coast Guard today, but the responsible party has indicated to me that he has indicated that he's waived his rights to deal with the salvage efforts, meaning that the Coast Guard will now federalize the situation using funds from what's called the Oil Spill Trust Liability Fund. That's a fund that after Exxon Valdez, it collects money based on throughput and pipelines throughout the country. So the Coast Guard has money to mobilize and bring a contractor to bear. My understanding is that the local Coast Guard sector, the captain of the port, will at some point, and again, because I didn't receive a phone call today, I don't know what their timeline is, but the Coast Guard is federalizing the process. They will use money from the Oil Spill Trust Liability Fund, which is managed at the headquarters level. That fund manager will request some kind of repayment or all repayment from the responsible party. So those are the facts I know today. I don't have a timeline as far as when the Coast Guard will bring to bear a contractor to deal with the vessel. Again, the federal responsibility from the Coast Guard is oil pollution at this point. When I did speak with the representative of the Coast Guard today, he suggested to me that they would either pump the vessel out, right the vessel and leave it in place, or they would evaluate and recover the vessel, salvage the vessel and put it on a barge and remove the hull from the scene. Those are the facts. I'm willing to answer any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Yucatel? Ms. Wall?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Yucatel, for being here. In addition to kind of pollution concerns, are there other impacts that this vessel is having in terms of activities that are happening or other
The
things?
Mayor, Ms. Wall, as far as navigational hazard to shipping or for the future cruise ship, it's really not, it's not impactful. There is the forced sewer main, the sewer main that goes from the lift station near the Seadrome dock goes under Juneau Harbor and then under the dock here. We are aware of that, and whatever future contractors are mobilized, we'll make sure that they are fully aware of that aspect.
Mr. Yucatel, you said the Coast Guard is federalizing the incident. What does that mean for Docks and Harbors involvement? Does that mean we're totally out of it now?
So Mayor Treem, so when they federalize it, they are always the responsible government agency to respond to a discharge of oil pollution. So they have it's their job to run with it. So what the Coast Guard will do is they will provide oversight to an incident, and as long as the responsible party is taking proactive means to resolve the situation, they're hands off. When the responsible party indicates that they do not have sufficient funds to move in a timeline that's required by the federal government, the Coast Guard can step in and federalize it using their own funds to remove the threat of pollution.
Any more questions for Mr. Yucatel? Okay. I'm sure you will keep us posted if there's more we need to know. Thank you for the update. Thank you, Mr. Etheridge, for being here tonight. Any other staff reports?
No staff reports. Thank you.
Okay. That brings us to assembly reports. I'll do the mayor's report. I haven't done anything because of the holidays. I hibernated and it was lovely. I can tell you that Mayor Weldon is having a good time. I've received some pictures of penguins from her, so we have that to look forward to when she gets back. Committee and liaison reports. I will start with the Finance Committee. We met last week and discussed retention and recruitment incentives that will come back to us as more formalized plans. Our next meeting is the first Wednesday of February, and expect to hear from Bartlett on that since we postponed that last Wednesday. Mr. Watt is going to do lands before I forget.
Thank you, Mayor. Lands Committee met on December 19th. Had several topics that you had on the agenda tonight, including the Gold Belt, CP Marine land trade, the Eagle Crest Coffee franchise. I'd like to bring to your attention that the Lands Committee made a motion regarding a request from Harris Homes LLC to purchase city property. Harris Homes requested to purchase the property that the Assembly had already given direction to staff to work with Moline Investment Management. That was the property that was subject to the rezoning earlier on the agenda. Staff recommended in the negative to deny the application to purchase the property since we were already in process of working with and negotiating with Moline Investment Management. Lands Committee supported that negative motion. Wanted to be sure the full assembly was aware of that activity at Lands Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. Mr. Bryson, Public Works.
Mayor, Public Works and Facilities met again on that 19th. We talked about the transfers that we approved tonight, the charging infrastructure that we approved tonight. Director Kester reminded us that we had homework over the holidays that we dealt with then. We got an update for Reniger State Skate Park. Ms. Elfers gave us a presentation on the Perseverance Trail and the OHV park that's coming, and we discussed possible bus fare free. So our bus wouldn't have a fare anymore. There are 25 cities that do it. So we're looking into that. That's Public Works and Facilities, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Mr. Smith, HRC.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. HRC met earlier tonight. As I mentioned earlier, we had enough members present to establish a quorum, but not to actually take official action. So I am going to, as an individual assembly member, and I've cleared this with the attorney, make a recommendation for appointments to the Juneau Commission on Aging. And that is Jennifer Carson and Carol Endy being reappointed to the Juneau Commission on Aging for terms beginning the 1st of 2023 and ending 12/31 of 2024, so 2-year terms. And then I recommend that Jennifer Garrison be newly appointed to the Juneau Commission on Aging for a term beginning, I guess, probably immediately and ending December 31st, 2024. And Deborah Craig being appointed immediately to a term ending December 31st, 2024 to the public member over 65 seat. I'm sorry that I had to put that on the record, but those are the 4 appointments that I recommend to the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Any objection to those appointments? Okay, they are appointed. Are there any committees I'm forgetting? I don't think so.
Madam Mayor, if I could just give a brief update on the joint committee.
Oh, yes, please.
The Joint Facilities Committee, we are tentatively planning a meeting on the 26th at noon, the 26th of this month at noon. We're pulling that together, and I have some homework to do as well. Ms. Kester is an immense help, but I just wanted to let you know that that will be happening. This is the Joint Facilities Planning Committee. This is the joint committee between the Assembly. It's got Assembly members on it and school board members. I'm sorry, I sort of spoke in shorthand there.
I'm on that.
That's great.
Good to know. Thank you, Ms. Hale. Okay, I think that is it for committee reports. We'll go to liaison reports. We'll start with Will Alkudok.
Well, I was sick for the last SRRC and Planning Commission, but the Systemic Racism Review Committee meets tomorrow, and then the Planning Commission will meet again on January 24th. So we'll have an update next time. And I do want to say that a number of youth and adults were selected for the Arctic Winter Games that takes place every 4 years from here in Juneau. And hopefully I can bring those names next time, but it'd be great if we could at least lift their names up and wish them the best of luck as they head over to Canada at the end of the month to compete in the Arctic Winter Games.
Thank you. We should probably even get them to come to an assembly meeting. Ms. Hale.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. Juneau Commission on Aging, there's been some uncertainty about who will support them. Next meeting is January 17th. The airport board meeting, next meeting is January 12th. And I think I have no notes from prior meetings because we've met since then.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The PRAC met earlier, actually last week, and they discussed the ordinance on board consolidation that we discussed tonight. We heard their recommendation and then the proposed amendment, but we'll obviously continue those discussions. I missed the last Juneau Commission on Housing and Homelessness because I was out of town or otherwise occupied. Travel Juneau has not met. And then the basket committee has been busy working on the Juneau legislative reception, which happens next Tuesday, January 17th from 5 to 6:30 at the Elizabeth Peradovich Hall. That is a venue change. It's typically at Centennial Hall. And that is welcoming the legislature back. Tuesday, the 17th is the first day of the 33rd legislature. So hopefully we can all give them a good welcome back to their capital city. The Juneau delegation is hosting a town hall on Wednesday, January 11th. So 2 days from now, 5:30 to 7 at the Zontekahini Commons. And then we may know that the governor's inaugural is being held at the Elizabeth Peradovich Hall on January 20th. And that's all I had. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Aquatics Board met, I believe 2 weeks ago and discuss the consolidation ordinance. They did not make a motion in support or in opposition. I think they were fairly split, some in support and some not in support. I think their main and some that would like to see a consolidated PRAC have representation from the pool on it. I think they feel like that board has over the years been responsible for being a champion for the pool when there weren't always champions for the pool. So they had lots of questions there. They also met tonight. I was not there because I was at the HRC meeting, but they were reviewing this year's budget or this next year's budgets for the pool. So one of the duties that they work on. So I will get an update on that. The school board met immediately after our last meeting. A few big things on their agenda. They had the first reading of their budget revision. So if you recall, they had a deficit in FY22 that needed to be filled, as well as a deficit in FY23 that needed to be filled. And so they have a budget revision that will have a second reading tomorrow that accomplishes that. Primarily through a one-time state funding appropriation of $1.8 million, as well as an ask that will be coming before the assembly for the things that we can pay for of their budget. So we'll be, if that gets passed tomorrow, we'll be hearing from them, I'm sure, with that request and that budget revision. They also put out the RFP and I believe selected a contractor for a superintendent search. So they're hiring a search firm to begin the public process of hiring a new superintendent, as Superintendent Weiss is leaving at the end of the school year. And they will, be meeting again tomorrow. That is all for me.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. And last but not least, Mr. Bryson, who celebrated a birthday yesterday.
I did celebrate a birthday yesterday. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for reminding me of that. All right. So what do we have? Campus Council, they met today. They're still trying to recruit folks for the Board of Regents. Docks and Harbors was the last meeting of last year. They discussed the port development that we had passed, the Tagish, and most notably, there is less crime in the harbor these days because of the security measures that they took. DBA met last year. They discussed the Ironman or Ironman not coming back. They had a discussion about housing and pricing and what's affecting that. And there was a note on there that Centennial Hall is now closed for the remodel. The Glory Hall met. Well, that is not a city board. I did want to mention that it was Chloe. She was the acting interim executive director. It was her last meeting, and Maria is back from her 6-month sabbatical. In her next that next meeting, she'll lead that. And I just want to compliment our interim Madam Mayor on what a phenomenal job she did tonight, leading us at a regular assembly with some of the topics that we had too. Smooth as silk. Great job, Madam Mayor. That is all.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. That brings us to continuation of public participation on non-agenda items. Looking at the two members of the public who are shaking their heads. And I think that means we're adjourned, right?